Hey guys, so this is my exit review for the Waizowl OGM Pro. This is a mouse that fundamentally I think does a lot of things really well and that I was really impressed by, but ultimately there's just a couple of places where this mouse lets me down a little bit. That means I don't reach for this over other things in my collection. So let's talk about what I like about this mouse first. It's an ergo, but it has only a very slight tilt instead of a very aggressive tilt like EC or Outset do. I prefer this. Similar kind of tilt to like the G703 or MX518, so that's definitely more up my alley. The buttons are really good quality for the most part, especially for having big, relatively thin buttons on a light mouse. They use some foam dampening material to reduce some of the hollow sound from these large buttons, and it worked really well. I have Huano brown shell white dot silent switches in this one, which is why there's no big clicky noises from the switches. Scroll wheel, there is very low resistance to scrolling, but you can still feel the individual bumps pretty clearly, and it's convenient for web browsing and that type of thing. So good for some people, not as good for others. I don't have that much of an opinion one way or the other as far as whether it's a deal breaker or not for me. Not a big deal. What I didn't like as much was the scroll click. There's just something a little bit funky about it to me. It's hard to place exactly what made me slightly weirded out by it at first. But when I took the mouse apart and looked at the switch they were using, it was a very unconventional, tall switch. I don't know where I would get an equivalent replacement for that from. It's basically to match the tall encoder they use for this mouse because the front is reasonably tall on it. And they didn't have a raised PCB. It's all kind of one piece towards the front with the charge port and everything. Anyway, yes. So mechanically, in terms of the internal structure, really like the clicks. Short, responsive, snappy, good feel, good tactility. These are really light switches, and they still are just stiff enough that I don't accidentally click them all the time. So this would be a good candidate for things like Japanese Omrons going in this mouse as well. If you're a fan of light switches but don't want your actual clicks to be so light that you can't hardly rest your fingers on them, this is a good mouse for that. You use a light switch, you get a short travel with really clear and crisp tactility into your fingers from those clicks. Similar to some of the old Microsoft mice and the Zowie FK in that regard. Side buttons are similarly good. DPI button is perfectly good too. Stock skates I thought were really bad. Maybe there was a plastic coating on them I didn't remove. People are telling me about that. I put Tiger Arcs from a G Pro Wireless on it. Those worked a lot better for me, and they kept the screws exposed so I could disassemble the mouse if I wanted to again. So overall, happy with that solution. Despite this weird configuration with these skates, the mouse doesn't try to rock or pitch on me, so works well for that, despite looking funky. Yeah, so now we're already at 4 minutes. Hooray. Other than that, good buttons. Scroll click, I wish was a conventional switch for better repairability. That's really my main gripe with that. The other thing with this mouse, shape-wise, again, really like a lot of stuff on this mouse. Love, despite the fact that it's an ergo, that it has pretty minimal thumb divot. There is still one. It is still noticeable. But relatively speaking, the left side of this mouse is pretty flat. And basically what that means is not that there's no thumb divot, but there's no flare, no big flare in the rear left. That's a pretty common thing on ergo mice, right? To get a lot wider in this area. And it doesn't, and I prefer this design choice because it lets me do a better job of kind of tucking that mouse in against the thumb, the base of my thumb here, without it trying to interfere with this fleshy part of my hand. I know I probably talk about this like every freaking video. I'll shut up about it. But yeah, basically it lets me get the mouse twisted the right way inside my grip, and I don't feel like I'm fighting to hold the mouse in that orientation. But what does happen is when I hold it like that, I feel like this side of the mouse is a little bit empty. I wish I had a little bit more support here under my pinky knuckle, and then I wish it were a little bit wider up here for my pinky to make contact with the side of it a little bit easier. But it's got fully enclosed side of the button, so I got plenty of height here for my ring finger, which is good. So my ring and pinky fingers aren't really competing with each other for space. And fundamentally, I also enjoy that it's wider here than the outset is. I think this one is 61 millimeters. To the outset's 59. So this is actually a little bit wider grip width, which I appreciate. But yeah, just the basically this area in the back, the rear flare of it is a little bit thinner, it feels, compared to the outset. And again, why is that? Well, mostly it's from the loss of that flare on the left side, on the thumb side. And what they didn't do was add quite enough of a flare to the pinky side to compensate for that. Now, to be clear, they don't need to add a bunch of volume up here towards the top of the mouse. That part's fine. Where I want more width is kind of down here under the pinky knuckle. So basically, I don't want to have to kind of drop my pinky knuckle down and try to wrap it around the side of the mouse as much, right? I want to be able to have something that sits a little bit more under it so that I can rest kind of a 45-degree angle on top of it and maybe squeeze it inward if I need to. If you want examples of mice that do this flare out here with a relatively flat left side much better, in my opinion, look at the SteelSeries Rival 310. That's probably the one that's closest in size to this mouse while treating that aspect of an ergo shape with a better execution. So yeah, that's pretty much my main thing with this mouse. The funky scroll click from a repairability standpoint makes me not as keen to keep this mouse for many years and risk it breaking on me. The other thing basically is just that it's missing a little bit of support on the pinky side, so I'm always finding myself squeezing my hand a little bit trying to keep a good grip on the right side of the mouse. But yeah, other than that, a lot of stuff I really like with this mouse, and I'd love to see an updated version of it that addresses just those couple of issues. So a more conventional scroll click switch implementation, maybe a raised PCB for the front of the mouse or something, and a wider pinky flare, including keep it wider right up until about here, and then keep this narrow front end. Cool.